Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and today I'm going to share with you an IG Live that I did with executive coach Dwayne Dwyer. If you'd like to watch the video, you can find me at @novel_Natasha on Instagram.
How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I am awesome. I am really awesome. Your Instagram page or your Instagram feed tells a lot about the different things that you do, but could you also tell us more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Obviously, as you know, I'm a retired military veteran of 24 years. And then upon retiring, I just wanted to do something different, like make a difference to people. And I just recall an old friend of mine, a senior NCO, he told me, he said, man, you were great at leading people. He said, but when you understand how to mentor and guide and coach, he said, then you'll be phenomenal. And that kind of stuck with me over the years, right? And so from there, I ran into a good friend of ours, Sean Perry, right? And he kind of introduced me to John Maxwell. And then from there, we just kind of skyrocketed, right? And then that's what kind of, where I came up with the idea of innovative consulting solutions and services. And based upon that concept, our idea is just simply to add value to people so that they can continue to add value based upon whatever their niche is, whatever their core competencies are. And so we do that through the art of speaking, coaching, and innovative training to move people to a higher sense of awareness just so that they can achieve their best and help others to do the same. So that's just it in a nutshell.
I love it. I love how you say, like, that's just it. And it's like, that's huge. That's amazing. And I wanted to talk to you about inclusive leadership because I love how inclusive you are, not with only making other people feel included, but I have a long-running group of different leaders who we come together called Books and Beverages. And it was interesting because when you joined the group, we were already kind of established, but you fit in so perfectly. And it was not only because of your leadership, but also that inclusive nature that we have to have as leaders where I'm inclusive of you, and that makes people want to be more inclusive of us as well.
Yeah. You kind of set the conditions for that, right? So your leadership within itself kind of made it comfortable for me to come in and just feel like a part of the group. And, you kind of set the tone, which probably is going to lead greatly into some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. What is inclusive leadership to you? How does that play out for you?
Oh, yes. Great question. So for me, inclusive leadership is just, I look at it from two different perspectives, right? So you have the John Maxwell definition of leadership, right, which is just simply influence, nothing more, nothing less. And then, of course, you have the textbook definition of inclusivity. So you just slam them all together and just make it simple, right? So inclusive leadership to me is simply just providing access to opportunities for those people who generally would not necessarily have that access or feel marginalized when it comes down to those accesses. And you do it through two groups of people, right? Those who actually have control of the access, and then those who believe that they actually have access. And I think when you really stop and think about that, that really kind of sums up what inclusive leadership is all about.
I love that. See, now it's like there's going to be these long pauses of silence because I'm going to be really thinking about it. Like, yeah, that's...
We
do.
Yeah.
We do. And I love it. And to build on that, I agree, of course. And then I also think that it's much more difficult than we think it is.
Yeah.
We sometimes think like, I'm inclusive and I'm going to be able to go into this place and everybody's going to feel like they're a part of it because I believe they're a part of it, right? I always treat people like they matter because people always do.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, though, how it's actually so challenging to set those conditions and make sure that people feel included and to reach to them in the way that they need to. So, and combining those two things, I really love that because it hits both sides of it where there's this element of I'm including you, but then also empowering people to include themselves in some ways where they may not have felt before that they could or don't know how to do it. It's actually harder for people to speak up, I think, than we realize sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you said something that was key. I feel like I'm inclusive. Well, I think sometimes what we do, right, that could be part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we, in our mind, believe that we're already inclusive. Therefore, we feel that we have it. And I think one of the ideas is that we have to keep a concept of lifelong learning. So yes, we believe that wherever we are in our current sense of awareness, we include people, but let's not eliminate their ideas and thoughts, and let's ask them, do they feel included? And that's part of really what really inclusive leadership is all about. Opening the door to have those difficult conversations. Point the finger at me and tell me I'm not doing it. And be open to understand that, yes, I need to do better within that realm.
Yes. And I love what you said right there too, because as good as we think we are, or as good as the feedback that we get sometimes, there is always that we're always making a mistake kind of somewhere, right? There's always something new or something different that we weren't expecting. So being open to that and not getting defensive, because then that shuts down all inclusion, right? You shut out one, you're shutting out everybody, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was great. And I think in conjunction with that, right, just like when you shut out one, you shut out everybody, or they feel like they shut out. Well, when you open the door and allow one to speak and make sure that it's understood across the entire spectrum, well, that kind of gives people more motivation to come forward. I think a lot of times, like, we have this table, right? And so come sit at the table, let's have an open conversation. Well, that's twofold, right? Because just because I'm inviting you to the table, I don't know what your past experiences are. I don't know what your upbringing taught you. I don't know what type of pains that you've experienced. And so those things can prevent you from feeling like you belong at the table. And if you don't feel like you belong at the table, then chances are you may have a hard time expressing yourself at the table. So leaders got to go a little bit above and beyond to, help those who may not feel welcome, just not because of anything I'm doing, but just in general. Go above and beyond to make those feel like they're welcome and express their ideas and thoughts and feelings.
And you said two words specifically in there that are really important, and that's that welcome and that belonging.
Yes.
So Frances Frey, she and Ann Morris, they did some really great work where they were talking about this inclusion dial. And in it was like when people are in a group, they were talking about the workplace, but you can really apply it to any group. So in a group, do people feel safe first? And so whether that's physically safe or safe to be able to express themselves, do they feel welcomed?
Yeah.
And then do they feel celebrated? And then finally, do they feel cherished? And like you said, like some people also, their past experiences, they just need to be loved on a little bit more, right? To really let them know that, like, you do belong here. We do accept your whole self, right? Your whole evolved self, even your unevolved self sometimes, because that happens. Yeah. But I love that because it's so much more than just people kind of get into like diversity and inclusion and equity. All important, yes. But I think those are just the surface of these are the metrics, and now let's get into like we're actually a group here and a cohesive, inclusive team.
Yeah, absolutely. And this just really just sounds like our monthly conversations, actually. I think a lot of times, because you and I, we have similar experiences, right? We both come from a military background. Well, when you look at it, there is an established culture, right? And that culture, either it drives inclusion or it does not. And so overall, the climate for inclusive leadership starts at the top. So at the top, if we say, okay, this is what we believe in, and, Army values, right? So, in kind of acronym of leadership, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Well, within the fiber of the Army values is inclusivity. And so from a leadership perspective, do you actually not only believe in inclusive leadership, do you model inclusive leadership, and do you enforce it? And those three things, right? Believe in, modeling, and enforcing. When you look at those three things, that empower your people to come forth and speak. Even if it tells me like, well, sir, you need to do a better job. I should be open to receiving it. And those who you find that do that, those are our better leaders. Those are the ones who actually care about the people and make the people feel valued. So great point. I'm glad you shared that.
Yes, and I love what you said there. It's that psychological safety that, like, do people feel like if I speak up, because if we don't accept that, whatever that is in that moment, we're sending a bigger message than just, I don't like that idea. We're sending the message that, like, I don't like your ideas, and maybe I hate all of your ideas, which, like, when we talk about it, it seems like we all know that that's not the most rational thought process, but it's a human thought process, and we all do it. And when we put that on other people, we're making it less inclusive, making them feel not included in whatever that conversation is. So maybe somebody has a bad idea. We've all heard that. Like, great, that's right. But that's not what it's about, right? It's about, like, letting them have that voice when they're at the right table, and, you know, being able to express that.
Absolutely. I believe, and I've said this on countless occasions, I'm going to continue to say it because I believe it, right? Everything is relationship. The way you interact with people is relationship. The way you interact with finances, that's relationship. The way you interact with everything in your life, that's a relationship. And so when you look at leader and, you know, subordinate, I hate to use that term, but yeah. So leader and subordinate interaction, that is a relationship. And you cannot have a relationship if you do not have the freedom of communication between two parties, right? The way that I empower you in this relationship is listening. Not just saying listen, right? But listening to what it is that you're saying. So now we're talking about active listening, right? So I need to execute the tenets of active listening, and you need to see that I implement something that you said. Something that you said was so important, and it was important to the people collectively, that I make changes within the organization that not only honor what you said, right, but it empowers you to continue to speak to me as your leader.
Yes. And when you bring people together, sometimes, like, people say, oh, well, we need the senior people because we're brainstorming whatever.
Right.
But I found that when you really bring together everybody, regardless of their position, and get people together in a room and really brainstorming and writing everybody's ideas down, sometimes the person who you may not expect will come up with the most genius thing, and it just comes out of left field, and it's just because you didn't expect them to have an idea like that. But people have opinions about everything, and that's great, because then when they're allowed to express those, you come up with really new and innovative ways to do things.
And it's really, like, I teach targeting for the Cyber Center of Excellence, right? And so that's one of the things I talk about during MDMP. Don't just think about those people who need to be at the table. Go get the person who you don't know should be at the table and have them to listen in. Because let's be honest, if I am engaging targets and I have the logistician, the S4, right, he or she needs to be at the table, because they need to know certain things that I'm planning. But generally in a target style, the logistician isn't a part of that. It's the same thing when it comes down to organizations, right? And I don't care who it is, whatever it is you do, the lowest person in the organization, if they're operating some gadget, some widget, whatever the case may be, no one knows how that thing works better than that person, right? Because they've been with it, they have a relationship with it, whether it's good or bad relationship, right? It's still a relationship. And so when it comes down to it, they can tell you whether or not this great idea that you have, whether it's going to work or whether it's going to, present some type of hiccup. But then on the other aspect of it, just that one opportunity for that person to speak may change the course of that individual's day for, just that day or for that entire week. And they feel that they have a leader who listens, and that's what matters.
Yes, because like you said, they not only do they know the most about, like, that area, but they're also bringing the perspective from their side, but also from that other side. Like, you're getting a lot of perspective from that individual. So I want everybody's input, of course, right? But bring me that specialist who hasn't learned, like, sometimes people, when they're in an organization, military or otherwise, but they're in an organization for long enough that they start to self-filter when they talk to different people in leadership. I want someone who hasn't learned that filter yet. Right. I am not offended by how people talk sometimes. But give me that honest, like, ground truth of what is going on from your perspective.
Yeah. People have internally, whether it was something that they learned growing up or whether it's just something that's innate to them, people collectively have barriers, right? And so if you take 20 people and drop them in a room, they will find a way to segregate themselves. It's just a natural thing. But a good leader has a way to break through those barriers through the power of communication. And that's really what inclusion is all about. Just being able to talk to a person, regardless of where they're from, what their nationality is, what their educational background is. None of that stuff matters. What matters is how we show our love for people. And that's really what inclusion is all about. Do you feel loved? Do you feel valued? Do you feel like your organization is a home away from home, or is it work? And that's the difference.
Yes, and I think that that's right there one of the pieces that it takes a courageous leader.
Yep.
Because a lot of people get very scared of saying or doing the wrong thing, so then they just keep it very political, or what they call it, very professional, or whatever. But the truth is that you are, like you said earlier, like everything's a relationship, and every relationship has to be cultivated. So when we do that, it's this like mistake that people make where I just won't mention it because I'm too afraid of cancel culture, or I'm too afraid of these things.
Yeah.
But I've found that when you go into something and you're really just there to be a good leader, to love on that person, and if you make a mistake and you hear, and you can hear it when they say it, or by the look on their face, and they're like, ugh. But adjust in that moment and say, and either apologize if as appropriate, but acknowledge that, oh, maybe that wasn't the right thing. What is the right thing? Help, and then never do that wrong thing again. Sometimes something might be offensive to one person because of their past, their experiences, and how they identify, and not to another, even though on paper they may seem like they're the same. Yeah. So to really be able to not be afraid, but to really come at it with a lot of love, I think is the most important piece there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's old sayings, and it doesn't really matter what your background is, whether you're a believer or non-believer. Love covers a multitude of sin, right? Mm-hmm. If we really don't look at the actions of the person, but honor and respect the person, then we can always value the person. But there's something more to that, right? Because I mentioned previously that we have to live a life of just continuous learning, lifelong learning, right? Well, the first thing I must do is learn to value myself before I can learn to value someone else. I can't pour from an empty cup. So whatever I have in me, then I can give to you. Well, here's what I do believe. When you find leaders who are divisive, that's just them projecting who they really are, right? Some of the experiences that they've had, some of the things that they've gone through, whatever the case may be. And so they need to grow from that. That's really what it all boils down to. A lot of organizations try to combat that by providing certain leadership training, things of that nature. But the best way to train in it is to model it, right? To be that change that you want to see in the world. It needs to take place in the organization. People need to, and again, I just said, people need to feel that their work isn't work. Like, you love what you do. I love the people I work with. I love the organization. I love the culture. I love the dynamics. Like, we respect our differences, but we're so much alike that it's not even funny. And so we don't necessarily make it the most important thing in the room, right? We respect it. We honor it. We learn about it, right? Because when I choose and I desire to learn about you, think about, hey, he may actually like me, right? And then vice versa. And that's really what it's all about. And so when we live in an environment that empowers who we are, like, we recognize that we're the same, but we respect and appreciate our differences, and the organization empowers that type of thinking, then what you'll find is that we will literally gel for one another. You've experienced it. In the military, it doesn't matter where you're from, they will break you down from your own cultural norms, right? And then what we'll find is that we start calling each other brothers and sisters. You're from New York, you're from wherever, it doesn't really matter. And so that's really what it's all about.
It was really interesting because we had a new senior person. There was a person who, he was in just like a very I need to please this person, right? They're senior, and that is what it is. But what was so interesting was the whole time I was like, just ask him, talk to him about what, I've talked to him, and he's very open. He'll tell you exactly what it is that you want. And it was so interesting to watch this person not know how to almost coach themselves, not be able to have that self-value of being what I have to bring here. What was so interesting was to watch him talk to that senior leader in a room, and one of the first things he says was, I thought you didn't like me. The senior leader was like, I do. I don't know you, but I'm sure I do. And so I think sometimes when we don't give people that opportunity either, or we think that we put too many things on other people. These expectations of what the previous person thought or what the previous person wanted, or like we've said, our past experiences, and we don't allow that new leader to be who they are. And maybe they're inclusive, and usually I find that more are inclusive than are not.
Absolutely. And let's just be honest. I mean, I know and again, going back to our shared experience, right? I know when I became a leader, the leader that I wanted to model was the leaders who trained me, right? So based upon their style of leadership, I adopted that style of leadership. And that's what leaders mostly do until they get to the point of maturity. Once they reach the point of maturity, then they kind of adjust their leadership style for people. Well, that's the dangers that a lot of organizations, run into. If it's I can't remember who said it, I apologize, but it's a saying that says people don't leave organizations, they leave bad leaders. And so when you really stop and think about it, generally that bad leader is within mid-management, the ones who just got there, just not understanding how to do it, so forth and so on. These leaders up here, they have a responsibility to train these leaders, right, so that they can empower these people. That's really what the truth is. And when that training is lacking, so when these leaders up here take the time and the effort to empower, train these middle management, right, when you train middle management so that they can not only, because it's all about, we believed initially at one particular point in time, it was all about driving stats, driving results, getting results, right? And so you would get to the point where you just whip subordinates into submission. That doesn't work, right? Because subordinates will leave and go find another job. So when you train middle management to empower the people, then what you'll find is that you don't have to worry about the results because they will give you results beyond your expectation. Why? Because they believe in you as a leader, then they believe in the organization and the value, and they will walk around wearing paraphernalia supporting that organization because they believe in it.
Yes. From your perspective, so we talked about there's the senior leaders who really have to lead this, more junior people who we have to, love on them and help them get to a place where they know they can trust the organization. But what do you think that people at all levels of leadership could do to be more inclusive?
That's a great question. First and foremost, leaders need to humble themselves. I think that's the first thing that we need to do. We don't have all the answers. And just to give you an example, I had a friend of mine that I've known for years. I met him when we was in IUD Air Base, some years back when I was in Arson. And when he seen everything that was going on in the United States, he sent me a message. And, he asked me, how are you doing, so forth and so on. And I responded, and he said, man, I feel bad. Like, what can I do? And so I thought that was a great question, right? Like, what can I do? And so my response to him is that I wanted to honor that question. I said, what do you feel, what do you feel inclined to do? Right? So I didn't want to just give him an answer. I wanted us to generate those difficult conversations. So after we, look in the mirror and humble ourselves, then we have to be comfortable with difficult conversation, right? Talk about those things that need to be talked about, right? Get it all on the table. Now, bad news doesn't get better with time, right? Put it on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's toss around ideas. The ideas, be open to different perspectives, right? So humble ourselves, be comfortable with difficult conversations, be open to different perspectives. You mentioned that previously, and I thought that was a great point, right? But I also believe that we need to be open to understanding our own internal biases. Let's be honest, we all have them, right? So we need to be open to be aware of self-awareness is key. Self-awareness opens the door for growth. Once we understand the biases that we have, and again, let's just be honest, it was based upon some of the things that we learned in the past, our experiences, so forth and so on, right? So let's lay all of our biases on the table just as a leader or as a subordinate. And if we turn those things into a culture, which is driven by the command climate, I think that is the key to move from where we are into the untapped greatness that every person has.
And I think what people also don't realize is that a bias is dangerous because you don't know you're doing it and it negatively impacts someone else. So we have to, we may have all 200 at any given point of the day. I'm sure I could self-diagnose with whatever at any point. But
Right.
yeah, that understanding how biases are impacting our everyday interactions, and then just how do we work through that, or how do we have those people around us who we know will call us out on that when we're not realizing it, that we'll listen to, and it will still be a nice, good workplace to work.
Absolutely, right? And I mean, what is it, Jehovah's Window? Jehovah's Window talk about it.
Yeah.
We have blind spots, right? We have things that we do that we are totally unaware that they take place. And the only way that you know that they happen is if you listen to the feedback of somebody else. That's really what we're talking about here. The danger in that, and you touched on it, right? The danger in that is not accepting responsibility when someone makes you aware of it. That's the problem.
Yes, because we want to be defensive, or we're like, I didn't mean it like that. Well, it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is how it landed.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I said that too much.
Sometimes if I'm listening to someone and they're telling me something I don't like, I really have to still try to be a good listener, of course, but also, what about this is true? And have I heard this before?
Right.
And, I can do nothing with that information, but just being open to, what about this is potentially true? Or is this person a monster? I'm just kidding.
In the tenets of emotional intelligence, and what I would say is that another thing that has to happen in an organization as well. We have to have emotionally intelligent and competent leaders. That's really the key, right? One of the tenets of emotional intelligence is being emotionally aware. Just being emotionally aware alone is enough to actually stimulate growth in emotional awareness. So that's the key. The minute that we just shut down what someone else is saying, we're not aware at all. We're at zero awareness, and that's not good.
Yeah, even if you're just like, I am triggered right now, even just saying that, just acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And something else that you mentioned earlier when you were talking about difficult conversations, I think that when I've seen inclusion killed in an organization, it's when people are not willing to have those difficult conversations.
Absolutely.
And people act like confrontation is negative, and it can be, but anything could be. So having an honest, candid conversation, even if it's confrontational, I think is something a good skilled leader should be able to do. But I think that also helps that inclusive environment, because sometimes people need to hear a good hard truth, and it's what needs to happen, but it's good for them, and it's good for you, and you have to push your ego aside. Like you said earlier, you have to have humility and be like, it's hard for me, but I'm making it harder for them.
Absolutely.
By not saying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great. It's pushing your ego aside. I could talk about that for the next 45 minutes, right? Because I think you're 100% right. I think what this, boils down to is that we can be open, right, to the idea of challenging each other's paradigm, right? If we're not open to challenging our own paradigms, then we're stuck in our own ideas, believing that those ideas are right, until I meet someone who thinks differently than I do. And then from there, you tell me your ideas, I tell you my ideas, and then we compare ideas to not necessarily see what yours is wrong and mine is right. No. We compare them to see, okay, what you say makes sense. Maybe I can incorporate what you're saying into what I already know, and vice versa, and then we can move to the side of what's being more correct as opposed to what we thought was being right, which could be exclusive to some people.
Yes, ideas are not zero sum. But I find that, people are very much like that. They're like, well, his idea was different. It's like, but what parts about it are valuable?
Exactly.
If the whole thing isn't, or isn't to you.
Yeah, I tell people, like, if anybody ever heard me talk, right, one of the things I say that there is, no one is ever absolutely anything. You're not absolutely correct, and you're not absolutely wrong. In fact, man has zero absolute about them, period. Like, we're absolutely dependent. That's what we really are. And so when we understand that, I know some things, but I am not so shallow to believe that I know more than anybody else. So whatever you bring to the table doesn't matter. Like, you have a PhD, right? If, let's just say Joe or Tamika comes to the table and they only have a high school diploma or a GED, they know something And whatever it is, they know it is of value. And when you understand that, right, if you first value Tamika or Joe as a person, then you can value their conversation. And once you value their conversation, you find the value in their words. But there's also a responsibility as well. Just because I know that I'm at the table, that doesn't mean I just talk. I only talk when I want to bring value to the organization. So it's a dual-sided responsibility, just as a relationship is. There's always dual-sided responsibility in play.
I think that goes into that. Like when I think of diversity, I know there's like your textbook answer, but I also think of, diversity of generations and cognitive diversity. And people have different experiences. Some people's stories are uplifting. Some people's stories will bring you to your knees because it's just, but they've experienced this thing and walked through whatever they've walked through and what they can contribute. If you stand back and you let people be their authentic self and actually be truly included, people are amazing. And it has nothing to do with anything behind your name. Like, well, that's great, and people work hard for that, but it has nothing to do with that. Who you are, those things are nice and they may open a door for you, but those aren't where the ideas necessarily come from.
Right. I think you're so correct. I think each individual, and you hit the nail on the head, we talked about experiences, right? So each individual is uniquely amazing. And until we understand and accept that, then we believe that based upon some experience and individual accolades, we start separating people because of those things. But here's the beauty of it all, right? Your experiences are yours. No one has the right to tell you that they aren't valid. And it does not matter what they are. The only thing that matters is that they're personal to you and that you honor them. And because I honor you as a person, your experiences now are important to me. That, I believe, is the bottom line, like literally the underpinning behind inclusion. If we can actually accept that, like you said, put all of our titles on to the side. That's great, but that's not who I am. I'm a person who values people. And when you sit at this table, you are valued, and what you have to say carries value.
Yes. And I think that we are actually more, this sounds like a cliche thing to say, we're more alike than we think. But there was this series of YouTube videos that they did this thing in Denmark where they had people come in and they stood in these boxes. And it was a box of how we define ourselves, right? We're a certain class or a certain like frontline workers or these different things. And then they asked them other questions, and when they were asked a question, anybody from any group who identified with that would come to the center. So it was really to kind of show how alike we all are. But it was like really fun questions and the things that make us who we are, right? So like, who was a class clown? Or who, or like, but what was so, like, who's a step parent or who survived cancer or anything like that. But to see, it was somebody from every group, right? So that ultimately, it was like we all have a lot in common. Like we have more in common than we don't.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I just believe that that's the thing, right? That's the thing that matters. When we understand that we're so much more in common and respect our differences, that's where we've kind of fell off, right? And respect our difference and develop a degree of curiosity about our differences, right? I'm a connoisseur of different types of food, right? Just because I want to know. I want to know what that tastes like, how that's created, things of that nature. And that's just a very small capacity of what different cultures are. And again, it's one of those things that, and this, oh my God, one of my chiefs when I was a young E4, Son Rivera, right? His wife was amazing. And when you go to the house, like, she had a spread, and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't understand this. And here's the funny part about it. There was so much more than food, right? I just wanted to listen to them talk, watch how they interact with one another. I was learning so much in the moment that it wasn't even funny. So that's really what it's all about. Develop a degree of curiosity for someone other than yourself. Someone who doesn't look like you, who didn't grow up in the same neighborhood as you, doesn't have your same educational background. And especially for those who have been through some things. I just leave things as all-encompassing. Be curious about them. Help them as much as you possibly can, because ultimately that's what we're here. We're here to help people, and you don't know who you can help if you have a mentality that doesn't invite them to the table to speak honestly from their heart. Food is the great conversation starter. That's really what it is. Depending on who you talk to, we're going to call it food, we're going to call it breaking bread, we're eating lunch, whatever it's called, right? It is the ultimate conversation starter. Let's, take a couple of coworkers, people who you don't know, say, hey, what are you doing today? Let's go to lunch, right? And then they're like, really? Me? Yeah, you. Let's go to lunch. Okay, cool. And when you get there, be interested in them, right? The food is just the invitation. Be interested in them. Ask them about them. Ask them about their family. Ask them about their likes and dislikes and things of that nature. And you'll be surprised at the doors that open up in those conversations that you have.
Yes, and there's something about food that makes you step away from like the seriousness of other things too.
Yeah.
So I know that there was some big dramatic thing going on at work. I don't remember what it was, but I was like, pizza is the great unifier. Order us some pizza. We did, but it was interesting because you're right. In that moment, it was like everybody kind of took a breath. Okay, like let's talk about not this, but then you're able to go back into it, with a different perspective. Yeah. Any final thoughts or anything that you want to promote that you're working on right now?
Oh, wow. I got a number of things working on. As you know, I have this very long-lasting podcast that I've been working on. So eventually I'm going to get to the point of putting my podcast out there. But I have a podcast that's coming out. And again, these are the type of things that we're going to talk about. I believe, again, ultimately in empowering people. You are greatness in action. History has your name on it. You just have to continue to write. And that's really what it's all about. No one, I don't care who you are, you have not you've only scratched the surface of who you are destined to be. So don't get to the point of stagnation. Continue to move forward. Even if you don't know what's next, keep moving. That's really what it's all about. And again, I want to thank you for this conversation, because not only was this conversation much needed, but I think it was great. And when it comes down to inclusion, always honor someone more than yourself. That's really what I think it's all about. And give somebody an opportunity. That's my point. Give somebody an opportunity, because I don't care who you are. You were invited into a room that you do not belong. Pay it forward. Take someone else in the room that doesn't meet the accolades, that doesn't have the degree, but they have the desire, they have the thirst, they have the drive. Take them in the room so they can learn from different experiences, things of that nature. I mean, ultimately, that's really it. I mean, I'm everywhere. I have my website, DwayneDwyer.com. Obviously, I'm on Instagram, innovative_consulting_services. Twitter, Dwayne Dwyer 2. Just, reach out, say hi. If you believe I can help your organization, it would be an honor to do so. And again, if you're following Natasha, you're doing the right thing, because she is amazing.
Thank you for listening to the Equipping Leaders podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Please join me next time for more insight and resources to equip leaders.